There have been multiple reports of dead salmon in Alaska's Koyukuk River popping up on social media. Scientists in Anchorage noticed some of the photos and videos like this one and flew to the river last month to investigate for themselves. Holly Carroll is the Yukon area manager for the summer season at Alaska's Department of Fish and Game. She joined a group of scientists to investigate, and she joins us now via Skype. Holly, thank you so much for being with us. What did you find on your trip?
Well, like your video shows, we found a lot of dead chum salmon. And something to note about what they looked like, they looked good and dead. So that means that normally when we see dead salmon, they should have spawned and they'll look kind of rotted out because they've been, fighting on the reds, and then they die after kind of rotting. And these fish are pretty fresh looking. And when we cut them open, they still were full of eggs, which meant they hadn't spawned yet. And so that's a pretty unusual sight.
And what did you and your team find might be causing the fish to die off?
Well, it's hard to conclusively tell when fish are dead for a few days like what we saw, but we've had a lot of record warm water temperatures. And for salmon that are migrating hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, they need pretty cool water. Warm water causes their metabolism to speed up. They're not feeding. They've stopped feeding since they left the ocean. And when they start coming into the river, warm water temperatures are actually really bad for them. And we call it heat stress. And that can cause them to die before they get to where they're going. And we think that's likely what happened in the case of these chum salmon.
Well, how are you continuing to monitor the water, and in what areas are you particularly concerned?
Well, the interesting thing about this event is that the damage was probably done early in the season. When they were migrating through in the first 2 weeks of July, the main stem Yukon River, which is the river they were migrating into, had temperatures around 70 degrees. That sounds like great swimming water to us as humans, but for them, that was the stressful temperature that they encountered. Now, as water levels are coming up and we're getting closer to fall, a lot of the tributary temperatures are coming back down and they're safer for salmon. But for those particular salmon, the damage was likely done earlier in the season when they were traveling through that warm water.
And just for perspective here, what would have been normal? You say it was probably about 70 degrees. What would be a normal temperature for a river at this time of year?
60 degrees would be nicer for the salmon. That's the kind of temperature they're used to swimming in. And they can handle, periodic increases of temperature. It's what we saw this summer was that 70 degrees water. It didn't happen once or twice. It happened for an extended number of days, nearly 2 weeks. And so if the fish had to swim through that for 400 miles or 500 miles, then they entered the Koyukuk River, which happened to be very low, and they were having record warm air temperatures, so likely record warm water temperatures. Now those fish have gone through the gauntlet of swimming hundreds of miles, and they're hitting even warmer water. Normally when the fish swim in, they can find cold pockets of water and they can kind of recharge, but to be in extended warm water for a long time was probably just not great for them.
In our final minute left, Holly, I mean, when we see these images, some people might say, well, it only appears to be a few fish here. At what point do you sort of think there might be some red flags? Is there some kind of breaking point when perhaps you realize that this particular salmon population could really be catastrophically affected by the changing water temperature?
Well, I think it's more for this particular population, I would say this was likely not catastrophic. And the reason is we saw about 1,000 dead fish. But for perspective, this run was over 2 million, likely. So it is a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of how many fish we're talking about. Is this abnormal? Yes. Does this happen every year? No. So, could this be catastrophic for this particular species? No, I do not think so. It was not great for this particular river system. And the fish that were spawning this year, we won't see their returns or the young from this event for 4 more years. So time will tell on the effect that this had. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm certainly not panicking just yet. Salmon are incredibly resilient. And so we'll just keep watching and waiting.
All right, Holly Carroll for us. Holly, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.